The sun was setting over Pensacola Beach on August 12, 2013, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold. The kind of sunset that would have stopped Tiffany Daniels in her tracks. She would have reached for her camera or pulled out her sketchbook, capturing the moment with the urgency of someone who saw magic in everyday beauty. But that evening, Tiffany wasn't watching the sunset. She had already begun her journey into a mystery that would haunt the Gulf Coast for years to come. 25-year-old Tiffany Marie Daniels was the kind of person who collected vintage dresses and believed in synchronicity. She moved through life like she danced, with fluid grace and an otherworldly quality that made people stop and stare. Her apartment on Bayou Boulevard was a testament to her artistic soul. Canvases covered every wall, paintbrushes sprouted from mason jars like colorful flowers, and dance shoes were scattered across the hardwood floors like she might leap into movement at any moment. Born and raised in Pensacola, Tiffany had always been different from her peers. While other children played with dolls, she choreographed elaborate dance routines for her stuffed animals. While teenagers obsessed over celebrities, she spent hours in museums, studying the brushstrokes of masters and dreaming of creating something equally timeless. Her high school art teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, remembered Tiffany as a student who saw colors others couldn't perceive, who could capture emotions on canvas that left viewers speechless. Tiffany had this gift, Mrs. Rodriguez recalled years later. She could paint a simple landscape, but somehow it would make you feel homesick for a place you'd never been. Her art wasn't just visual, it was emotional. It reached into your chest and squeezed. After graduation, Tiffany had briefly attended the University of West Florida, studying fine arts and dance. But the structured academic environment felt constraining to her free spirit. She dropped out after 2 years, much to her parents' dismay, and began working various jobs around Pensacola while pursuing her artistic passions independently. She waitressed at beachside cafes, taught dance to children at a local studio, and eventually landed her position at the Pensacola Little Theater. Those who knew Tiffany described her as a kaleidoscope of creativity, always shifting, always surprising, always beautiful. She worked as a theater technician at the Pensacola Little Theater, but her real passion lay in her art and dance. She painted abstract pieces that seemed to capture emotions in swirls of color, and when she danced, witnesses said it was like watching poetry in motion. Her mother, Cindy Daniels, remembered how Tiffany would call at midnight, breathless with excitement about a new technique she discovered, or how the moonlight looked different from her balcony that night. She lived in a world that was more vivid than ours, Cindy explained, her voice catching slightly. Tiffany could find beauty in a cracked sidewalk, magic in the way shadows fell across a wall. She used to tell me that most people sleepwalk through life, but she was determined to stay awake for every moment. But beneath Tiffany's free-spirited exterior, there was a restlessness growing stronger by the day. Friends noticed she'd been talking more frequently about leaving Pensacola, about chasing bigger dreams in New York or Los Angeles. She felt confined by the small-town life, like a butterfly beating its wings against glass. Pensacola is too small for all my dreams, she told a coworker just weeks before she disappeared. It was a sentiment that would later take on an ominous significance. Her closest friend, Sarah Martinez, not the detective, but a fellow artist she'd met at a local gallery opening, remembered the conversations they'd had about escape. Tiffany felt trapped, Sarah recalled, not by people or circumstances exactly, but by geography. She'd talk about cities where art mattered, where she could find her tribe. She'd show me apartments online in Brooklyn or Venice Beach, places where she imagined herself painting in natural light and dancing until dawn. In the months leading up to her disappearance, Tiffany had become increasingly involved in the local art scene. She'd participated in several group shows, sold a few pieces, and even had a solo exhibition planned for the fall. But success seemed to amplify her restlessness rather than satisfy it. She began talking about using her art sales to fund a move, about finding representation in larger markets. In the days leading up to her disappearance, those closest to Tiffany noticed subtle changes. She seemed more introspective, spending longer hours in her art studio, working on pieces she kept private. Her dance instructor, Carmen Reyes, mentioned that during their last session, Tiffany had seemed distracted, as if her mind was somewhere else entirely. She kept stopping mid-routine, Carmen remembered. She'd stare out the window at the parking lot, like she was expecting someone or waiting for something. Her co-workers at the theater also noticed the shift. Tiffany, who usually bubbled with enthusiasm about upcoming productions, had grown quiet about her work. She'd arrive on time, complete her tasks efficiently, but the spark that usually animated her interactions with colleagues seemed dimmed. Looking back, they wondered if she'd already begun saying goodbye. Monday, August 12, 2013, began like any other workday at the Pensacola Little Theater. But for Tiffany Daniels, it would mark the end of her life as everyone knew it. The morning sun streamed through the theater's tall windows as she arrived for her shift as a lighting technician. Her usual canvas messenger bag slung over her shoulder, her long brown hair catching the light like silk. But something was different about her that day, a quality her co-workers would later struggle to define. She seemed both distant and determined, like someone who had made a difficult decision and was seeing it through. Mark Thompson, the theater's technical director, noticed it immediately when Tiffany clocked in at 9 a.m. She had this look, Mark remembered. Tiffany usually bounced when she walked. I know that sounds weird, but she had this energy that was almost childlike. That Monday she moved differently, purposeful but also heavy, like she was carrying something invisible. Tiffany went through her morning routine mechanically, checking lighting equipment and organizing props for the upcoming production of Our Town. An ironic choice that wouldn't be lost on investigators later. She tested spotlights, adjusted gel filters, and made notes on her clipboard with unusual precision. Her movements were economical, efficient, as if she was determined to complete everything perfectly before. What? No one could say. Normally, Monday mornings at the theater were filled with Tiffany's chatter about her weekend adventures. She'd regale her colleagues with stories of new galleries she discovered, impromptu photo shoots on the beach, or late-night painting sessions that had kept her up until dawn. She had a gift for making ordinary moments sound extraordinary, for finding narratives in the mundane details of life. But that Monday, she kept to herself, focused on tasks with an intensity that seemed out of character. When Mark asked about her weekend, she offered only a vague smile and said it had been productive. When Jennifer Walsh, a fellow technician, complimented a new sketch Tiffany had pinned to the bulletin board in their shared workspace, Tiffany barely acknowledged the praise. It was like talking to a ghost of herself, Jennifer recalled. She was there physically, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. I kept waiting for her to snap back into being Tiffany, but it never happened. Around 11:30 a.m., Tiffany received a phone call on her cell phone. She stepped outside to take it, and through the theater's front windows, her co-workers could see her pacing in the parking lot, gesturing as she spoke. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes, and when she returned, the change in her demeanor was even more pronounced. She seemed agitated, checking her watch frequently and glancing toward the exit. At exactly noon, Tiffany approached her supervisor, David Kim, with a request that caught everyone off guard. She needed a leave of absence, she said immediately. When David asked for details, she offered only vague explanations about needing time to figure things out, to pursue some personal projects that couldn't wait. I've been doing this job for 15 years, David later told investigators. You learn to read people, to know when they're hiding something or going through a crisis. Tiffany wasn't acting like someone having a breakdown or dealing with a family emergency. She was acting like someone who had made a decision and was sticking to it, no matter what. David tried to negotiate. Could she take a few days? A week? Surely whatever she was dealing with could be managed without burning bridges at work. But Tiffany was unmovable. She needed the leave to start immediately that very day. There was an urgency to her request that discouraged further questioning. She kept looking at her phone, David remembered. Every few minutes, she'd glance at the screen like she was expecting a message or waiting for a specific time. And she had this way of standing, like she was ready to run. Within 2 hours, Tiffany had cleared out her workspace with systematic efficiency. She removed personal items from her locker, gathered art supplies and sketches she'd kept at the theater, and organized her technical notes for whoever might need to cover her responsibilities. Her movements were quick but not frantic, purposeful rather than panicked. Her colleagues watched with growing unease as Tiffany said her goodbyes. These weren't the casual see-you-later farewells of someone taking a short break. She hugged each person individually, holding the embraces a beat longer than normal. To Jennifer, she said, "Take care of yourself," with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to a temporary absence. Looking back, it felt like she was saying goodbye forever, Jennifer recalled, her voice breaking slightly. But at the time, we thought she was just being dramatic. Tiffany was always emotional, always intense about everything. We figured she'd be back in a week or two with some wild story about an artist's retreat or a spontaneous road trip. Tiffany's final act at the theater was to update the lighting plot for our town, ensuring that her replacement would have detailed notes about every cue, every gel change, every subtle adjustment she'd planned. It was a considerate gesture that spoke to her professionalism, but it also felt final in a way that unsettled her supervisor. At 2:47 p.m., according to the theater's security cameras, Tiffany Daniels walked out of the Pensacola Little Theater for the last time. She paused at the door, looking back at the lobby where posters for upcoming shows covered the walls, then pushed through to the parking lot where her black Toyota Corolla waited in the afternoon sun. That evening, neighbors in Tiffany's apartment complex at 2515 Bayou Boulevard noticed lights burning in her second-floor windows until late into the night. The glow was visible through her sheer curtains, warm, golden light that spilled onto the parking lot below. Some reported seeing her silhouette moving around inside, as if she were packing or organizing. The usual sounds that accompanied Tiffany, music playing, the soft padding of dance steps across the floor, were notably absent. Mrs. Henderson, who lived in the unit directly below Tiffany's, later told investigators that she'd heard footsteps well past midnight, pacing back and forth across the hardwood floors. It wasn't like her, Mrs. Henderson remembered. Tiffany was always so considerate about noise, especially late at night. If she danced or played music after 10 p.m., she'd always apologize the next day. But that night, it sounded like she couldn't sit still, like she was wrestling with something. The pacing continued until nearly 3 a.m., when suddenly, the sounds stopped. The lights remained on, casting their golden glow through the windows, but the apartment fell silent. Mrs. Henderson, who suffered from insomnia and had become accustomed to Tiffany's gentle nighttime sounds, found the sudden quiet unsettling enough that she almost called to check on her upstairs neighbor. By morning, those lights were still burning, but Tiffany was gone. Wednesday, August 14th dawned gray and humid, with the kind of oppressive heat that made the air shimmer above the asphalt. For James Patterson, a park ranger with 23 years of experience patrolling Florida state parks, it started as a routine morning shift at Fort Island Trail. He'd driven this particular route hundreds of times, checking on the remote beach access points and ensuring overnight campers had properly cleared their sites. But as he rounded the curve toward the main parking area at approximately 8:15 a.m., something caught his eye that made him immediately radio for backup. There, sitting alone in the otherwise empty lot, was a black Toyota Corolla. The car appeared to have been there for some time. Dew covered the windshield, and Patterson could see condensation fogging the interior windows. Fort Island Trail was about 20 miles southeast of Pensacola, accessible only by a winding road that led through marshland and scrub forest. It wasn't the kind of place people stumbled upon by accident. The beach here was wild and undeveloped, popular with photographers, nature lovers, and locals seeking solitude. It was exactly the kind of place Tiffany Daniels might go to paint or clear her head. But the abandoned car triggered immediate concern. Patterson approached the vehicle cautiously, following protocol for potentially dangerous situations. But what he found defied his expectations. The car was unlocked, keys dangling from the ignition, as if someone had simply stepped out for a moment and forgotten to secure it. The driver's door was closed but not locked, and through the windows, Patterson could see personal belongings scattered throughout the interior. 23 years on this job, and I'd never seen anything quite like it, Patterson recalled. Usually, when you find an abandoned car, there's some sign of what happened. Accident damage, evidence of a struggle, signs that someone left in a hurry. This looked like someone had just evaporated. Within 30 minutes, the parking lot was swarming with law enforcement. Detective Sarah Martinez of the Escambia County Sheriff's Office was among the first to arrive, and she immediately began documenting the scene with the thoroughness that would characterize her investigation of Tiffany's case. The contents of the car told a story, but it was a story full of contradictions. Tiffany's purse sat on the passenger seat, unzipped and easily accessible. Inside, investigators found her driver's license, credit cards, and $63 in cash, not the actions of someone planning to start a new life elsewhere. Her debit card was there too, and later analysis would show no attempts to access her bank accounts after August 12th. In the back seat, a collection of art supplies suggested Tiffany had come to the beach with creative intentions. A small easel was propped against the window, canvases were stacked neatly on the floor, and a tackle box filled with paints, brushes, and charcoal pencils sat open, as if she'd been selecting materials for a project. Several completed sketches were scattered across the seat, rough drawings of seascapes and cloud formations that investigators would later confirm matched Tiffany's artistic style. More puzzling were the clothes. A small duffel bag contained what appeared to be several days' worth of clothing. Casual outfits, underwear, a sundress that friends would later identify as one of Tiffany's favorites. There was also a sleeping bag still in its stuffed sack, and a pillow from her apartment. It looked like she'd been preparing for a camping trip or extended stay somewhere. But where? Detective Martinez meticulously photographed every item, creating an inventory that would be scrutinized for months. Among the more personal items were a journal, locked with a small brass clasp, and a manila envelope containing what appeared to be important documents. The journal would later prove to be mostly art notes and sketches, with no clear indication of Tiffany's state of mind or future plans. But it was what investigators found outside the car that transformed the case from puzzling to genuinely eerie. Leading away from the Toyota were footprints in the sand. Small, consistent with Tiffany's shoe size 7, heading toward the water across the dunes. The prints were remarkably clear, preserved by the previous night's dew and the lack of wind. Crime scene photographer Michael Torres spent over an hour documenting the footprints, using rulers and evidence markers to show their size, depth, and direction. They were the clearest prints I'd ever photographed on a beach, Torres remembered. Usually sand shifts and blurs, but these were perfect. You could see the tread pattern of her shoes, the way her weight distributed with each step. Detective Martinez and her team followed the footprints for about 200 yards, documenting each step with photographs and GPS coordinates. The prints led across the main beach, over small dunes covered in seagrass, through patches of softer sand where they became deeper and more defined. They seemed to follow a purposeful path, not the wandering steps of someone lost or confused. The prints told a story of deliberate movement. Tiffany had walked at a steady pace, her stride even and unhurried. There were no signs of running, no indication that she'd stumbled or fallen. The depth of the impression suggested she'd been carrying something. Perhaps the small backpack her coworkers remembered seeing her with at the theater. As the team crested the final dune before the water's edge, they expected to find the footprints continuing into the surf or along the waterline. Instead, they found something that would haunt everyone involved in the investigation. The footprints simply stopped. "That's what I still can't get out of my head," Detective Martinez said years later, her voice still carrying the frustration of that moment. The prints didn't lead into the water. They didn't circle back toward the car. They didn't scatter or show signs of struggle. They just ended, like she'd taken one more step and vanished into thin air. The final footprint was as clear and well-defined as the first, positioned about 15 feet from the water's edge on relatively firm sand. There was no indication that waves had washed away subsequent prints. The tide had been low the previous night, and the sand beyond the final print was undisturbed except for natural wind patterns and the tracks of shorebirds. Investigators expanded their search in concentric circles around the final footprint, looking for any indication of what might have happened next. They searched for secondary tracks, signs that another person might have been present, evidence that Tiffany had been picked up by a boat or vehicle. They found nothing. The beach in this area was bounded by dunes on one side and the Gulf of Mexico on the other, with no easy access points for vehicles. The nearest road was the parking lot where Tiffany's car had been found, nearly 200 yards away through soft sand that would have shown tire tracks clearly. Boats rarely came close to shore in this area due to shallow water and submerged obstacles. As the hours passed and the search expanded, the mystery only deepened. 9 units brought in to track Tiffany's scent confirmed the path of the footprints, but lost the trail at the same point where the prints ended. Helicopters from the Coast Guard flew grid patterns over the water, looking for any sign of disturbance or debris. Ground teams combed the beach and surrounding areas for miles in each direction. "We searched like her life depended on it," remembered Sergeant Tom Bradley, who coordinated the volunteer effort. Local people who knew the area, experienced outdoorsmen, retired law enforcement. Everyone wanted to help find this girl, but it was like searching for a ghost. She'd left no trace beyond those footprints, and they led absolutely nowhere. As the sun set on August 14th, casting the same golden light across the beach that Tiffany might have come to paint, investigators were left with more questions than answers. Somewhere in that pristine sand, between the final footprint and the endless expanse of the Gulf of Mexico, Tiffany Daniels had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed at all. The discovery of Tiffany's abandoned car and the mysterious footprints triggered one of the most extensive search operations in Northwest Florida's recent history. By dawn on August 15th, the remote stretch of Fort Island Trail had been transformed into a command center, with law enforcement vehicles, Coast Guard boats, and volunteer coordination tents dotting the landscape. The immediate response was massive and multifaceted. The U.S. Coast Guard launched both surface vessels and aircraft, conducting systematic grid searches of the Gulf waters. Coast Guard Station Pensacola deployed 3 boats and 2 helicopters, scanning nearly 50 square miles of water over the first 3 days. They searched based on tidal patterns and current models, trying to determine where someone entering the water at that location might have been carried. "The Gulf can be deceptive," explained Coast Guard Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, who coordinated the maritime search effort. The water looks calm from shore, but there are strong undertows and rip currents, especially around the barrier islands. If someone had gone into the water, either voluntarily or involuntarily, we needed to find them quickly. But the Coast Guard's sophisticated search patterns yielded nothing. No clothing, no personal items, no trace of human presence in the water. Even more puzzling, their sonar equipment detected no anomalies on the seafloor that might indicate remains. For a service accustomed to recovering evidence from maritime disappearances, the complete absence of any trace was unprecedented. On land, the search was equally intensive. Escambia County Sheriff's Department organized teams of deputies, Park Service personnel, and trained volunteers to comb every inch of accessible terrain around Fort Island Trail. Search and rescue teams from 3 counties participated, bringing specialized equipment and dogs trained to detect human scent. The K-9 units proved particularly valuable in confirming the path Tiffany had taken. 3 different dogs, working independently, followed the same route marked by the footprints, confirming that Tiffany had indeed walked that specific path. But like the physical evidence, the scent trail ended abruptly at the same location where the footprints stopped. "The dogs never lie," said handler Rebecca Chin, whose German Shepherd Max had 23 successful search missions to his credit. "Max followed that scent trail like it was a highway, but when we got to that spot where the prints ended, he just sat down and looked at me. It was like hitting a wall. There was nothing beyond that point. No scent, no indication she'd continued in any direction." Volunteers poured in from across the region. Local art communities, dance studios, and theater groups organized search parties. Tiffany's disappearance had captured public attention partly because of her artistic background, but also because of the mysterious circumstances. Here was a young woman who seemed to have literally vanished into thin air, leaving behind a puzzle that demanded solving. Among the volunteers was retired FBI agent Robert Hayes, who had moved to Pensacola after a 30-year career investigating missing persons cases. Hayes had followed the case in local media and was intrigued by the unusual evidence pattern. He offered his services to the Escambia County Sheriff's Department and was quickly integrated into the investigation team. "In 30 years, I'd never seen anything quite like this," Hayes recalled. "Usually, disappearances leave breadcrumbs, witnesses, physical evidence, digital footprints, some indication of what happened. Tiffany's case had all the physical evidence you could want, but it led to nothing. It was like she'd walked to the edge of the world and stepped off." The investigation expanded far beyond the beach. Detectives interviewed everyone in Tiffany's life: family members, friends, co-workers, casual acquaintances. They examined her phone records, bank statements, social media activity, and email accounts. What emerged was a portrait of someone who seemed to be planning something, but what that something was remained frustratingly unclear. Tiffany's computer revealed extensive research into travel destinations across the United States. Her browser history showed visits to websites for cities like Asheville, North Carolina, Austin, Texas, Portland, Oregon, and Burlington, Vermont, all places known for vibrant arts communities. She'd researched bus routes, train schedules, youth hostels, and affordable apartments. She'd even looked into art supply stores and dance studios in these various cities. "It looked like she was window shopping for a new life," Detective Martinez explained. "But if that was her plan, why leave her ID and money behind? Why abandon her car in such a remote location? And why walk away from it in such a deliberate manner?" Financial records added another layer of mystery. In the weeks before her disappearance, Tiffany had withdrawn several $100s in cash from her bank account. Not enough to suggest she was planning to disappear permanently, but more than her usual spending patterns. She'd also sold 3 paintings to a gallery in Mobile, Alabama, receiving $800 in cash that she'd deposited immediately. More intriguingly, phone records showed several calls to numbers that investigators couldn't initially trace. These calls were made from Tiffany's cell phone in the days before her disappearance, including one on the morning of August 12th, possibly the call her coworkers had witnessed in the theater parking lot. When detectives finally tracked down these numbers, they led to prepaid phones that had been purchased with cash and subsequently discarded. The investigation into Tiffany's personal relationships revealed a young woman who was generally well-liked but maintained a certain distance from others. She'd had several romantic relationships over the years, but none that were particularly serious or recent. Her ex-boyfriends were interviewed and cleared of involvement in her disappearance. More concerning were reports from friends about changes in Tiffany's behavior in the months before she vanished. Several people mentioned that she'd become more secretive, more guarded about her activities and whereabouts. She'd canceled social plans more frequently and had been spending more time alone. She used to be so open, remembered her friend Sarah Martinez. Tiffany would tell you about every thought that crossed her mind, every emotion she was feeling. But in those last few months, it was like she'd built walls. She'd smile and say everything was fine, but you could tell she was holding something back. Most troubling were hints that Tiffany might have been afraid of something or someone. Her dance instructor, Carmen Reyes, remembered Tiffany asking about the studio's security procedures and whether the building was locked at certain times. A neighbor reported that Tiffany had asked about getting her apartment's locks changed, though she'd never followed through. Looking back, there were signs, Carmen reflected. Little things that didn't seem important at the time. She'd check her car before getting in, look over her shoulder when walking to the parking lot. I thought she was just being cautious, but maybe she had reason to be scared. The investigation also revealed that Tiffany had been researching personal safety topics online. Her search history included queries about restraining orders, women's self-defense classes, and how to disappear safely. She'd visited websites about domestic violence resources and missing persons cases, though investigators found no evidence that she was in an abusive relationship. As weeks turned into months, the case began to evolve from a search and rescue operation to a criminal investigation. The possibility that Tiffany had been abducted, either by someone she knew or by a stranger, became the working theory. The deliberate nature of her walk into the dunes, combined with the complete absence of evidence beyond the final footprint, suggested to investigators that she might have met someone at that location. The more we learned about Tiffany's state of mind and behavior in the months before she disappeared, the more convinced we became that this wasn't a suicide or accident, Detective Martinez explained. Someone who's planning to harm themselves doesn't research bus routes to other cities. Someone who's planning a new life doesn't leave their identification behind. This had all the hallmarks of a planned meeting that went wrong. But if Tiffany had arranged to meet someone at Fort Island Trail, who was it? And how had they managed to remove her from the scene without leaving any trace? The investigation had uncovered dozens of potential leads but no definitive answers. No clear path forward. The case that had begun with such clear physical evidence, the car, the footprints, the personal belongings, had evolved into a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Just when it seemed like Tiffany Daniels had vanished completely from the world, leaving behind only questions and that haunting trail of footprints, something extraordinary began to happen. In the months following her disappearance, reports started trickling in from across the southeastern United States. Sightings of a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to the missing artist. The first credible sighting came in October 2013, nearly 3 months after Tiffany's disappearance. A truck stop waitress in Mobile, Alabama, just 2 hours east of Pensacola, contacted local police after recognizing a customer for missing person flyers that had been distributed throughout the region. The woman had entered the diner around 2 a.m., ordered coffee and pie, and paid with exact change from a handful of crumpled bills. She looked exactly like the girl in the picture, waitress Linda Morrison told investigators. Same height, same build, same long brown hair. But what really caught my attention was how she moved. Graceful, like a dancer. She kept looking toward the parking lot, checking her watch, like she was waiting for someone or worried about the time. Morrison described the woman as nervous but not distressed, well-groomed but dressed casually in jeans and a simple t-shirt. She'd carried a small backpack and what appeared to be an art portfolio or large sketchbook. Most significantly, when Morrison had tried to make conversation, the woman had spoken with what sounded like a slight accent. Not foreign, but different from the local dialect. She thanked me for the coffee, but something about her voice was careful, Morrison remembered. Like she was concentrating on how she sounded, if that makes sense. And when I asked if she was traveling far, she just smiled and said she was finding her way home. Those words stuck with me. By the time police arrived to investigate, the mysterious woman was gone. Security cameras at the truck stop had malfunctioned that night, providing no video evidence. But Morrison's detailed description and the timing of the sighting, during early morning hours when few people traveled, gave investigators hope that Tiffany might be alive. More sightings followed, creating a trail of reported appearances that stretched across the southeast. In November, a bus station attendant in Tallahassee reported seeing a woman matching Tiffany's description purchasing a ticket to Atlanta with cash. In December, a store clerk in Savannah, Georgia, contacted police after recognizing what she believed was Tiffany's face from a missing person flyer that had been shared on social media. Each sighting gave us renewed hope, Cindy Daniels remembered, tears forming in her eyes. Part of me wanted to believe that Tiffany was out there somewhere, that she'd chosen to disappear and was trying to build a new life. But part of me was terrified about what might have happened to force her to run. The most compelling sighting came in March 2014, nearly 8 months after Tiffany's disappearance. Social worker Diana Chun was conducting outreach at a homeless shelter in Asheville, North Carolina, one of the cities Tiffany had researched online, when she encountered a young woman who stopped her in her tracks. She was sitting in the corner of the common room, sketching in a notebook, Chun recalled. Something about her posture, the way she held her pencil, reminded me of art students I'd known in college. When I got closer, I realized she looked exactly like the missing girl from Florida I'd seen on the news. Chun approached carefully, introducing herself and offering assistance. The woman was polite but guarded, accepting information about local resources, but declining help with housing or employment. Most significantly, she had artistic supplies with her, not just basic drawing materials, but professional-grade charcoal pencils and paper that suggested serious artistic training. I managed to glimpse her sketchbook when she was distracted, Chin explained. The drawings were sophisticated landscapes, portraits, abstract compositions. The style reminded me of the artwork I'd seen attributed to Tiffany Daniels in news reports. I was almost certain it was her. Chun excused herself and immediately contacted local police, who arrived at the shelter within 30 minutes. But by then, the mysterious woman had vanished, leaving behind only a half-finished sketch of the mountains visible through the shelter's windows. The drawing was preserved as potential evidence, and art experts later confirmed that the style and technique were consistent with Tiffany's known work. These sightings presented investigators with a complex puzzle. If Tiffany was alive and traveling voluntarily, why hadn't she contacted her family? If she was in danger or being held against her will, how was she managing to appear in public places and interact with strangers? And why did the sightings seem to trace a deliberate path northward, away from Florida? Some investigators theorized that Tiffany might have staged her own disappearance, perhaps to escape some unknown threat or simply to start fresh somewhere new. The fact that several sightings described a woman traveling alone, using cash, and seeming nervous but not distressed supported this theory. Her extensive online research about other cities could have been preparation for a planned disappearance. It's not unheard of, explained Dr. Michelle Torres, a psychologist who specialized in missing persons cases. Young adults, especially creative types, sometimes feel trapped by expectations or circumstances. They might stage a disappearance to gain control over their narrative, to become someone new. The beach scene could have been staged to make it look like suicide or abduction. But this theory had significant problems. If Tiffany had planned to disappear, why leave her identification and money behind? How had she managed to travel without accessing her bank accounts or using her credit cards? And most puzzling, how had she gotten away from Fort Island Trail without leaving any additional footprints or tire tracks? Other theories were considerably darker. Law enforcement began investigating the possibility that Tiffany had been abducted, possibly by someone involved in human trafficking. The fact that some sightings described her as seeming nervous or looking over her shoulder suggested she might not be traveling by choice. The artistic supplies could have been provided by her captors to maintain a cover story or to keep her compliant. Human trafficking doesn't always look like what people imagine, explained FBI Special Agent Carol Williams, who had worked trafficking cases throughout the Southeast. Victims aren't always chained up in basements. Sometimes they're moved around, allowed limited freedom, told their families will be hurt if they try to escape. They might appear in public but be too afraid to call for help. This theory gained credibility when investigators discovered that several other young women had gone missing from the Gulf Coast region in the years surrounding Tiffany's disappearance. While there was no direct evidence linking these cases, the pattern was troubling enough to warrant federal attention. The investigation took another dramatic turn in June 2014 when a photograph surfaced that sent shockwaves through the case. A tourist visiting Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, had posted vacation photos on social media, and in the background of one image, barely visible among a crowd of beachgoers, appeared to be a young woman who looked remarkably like Tiffany Daniels. The photograph was grainy and taken from a distance, but digital enhancement revealed a slender woman with long dark hair, wearing a flowing sundress that matched descriptions from previous sightings. More compelling was her posture and the way she stood slightly apart from the crowd, as if she didn't quite belong or was trying to remain inconspicuous. That photograph haunted me, admitted Detective Martinez. Here was potentially our best evidence that Tiffany was alive, but it raised more questions than it answered. If it was her, why was she at a tourist beach in South Carolina? Was she there voluntarily? And why did she look so isolated? The photo sparked a renewed search effort in the Myrtle Beach area. Local police distributed flyers, interviewed hotel staff and restaurant workers, and canvassed the beach where the photo was taken. Several people came forward claiming to have seen a woman matching Tiffany's description, but no one had interacted with her directly or could provide additional details. As the first anniversary of Tiffany's disappearance approached, her family organized a vigil on Fort Island Trail, at the spot where her footprints had ended. Nearly 200 people attended, including many who had never met Tiffany but had been touched by her story. They brought flowers, artwork, and candles, creating a temporary memorial that glowed against the gathering dusk. Cindy Daniels stood at the edge of the water, looking out at the endless expanse of the Gulf of Mexico, and spoke about her daughter's spirit. Tiffany believed in magic, she said, her voice carrying across the quiet beach. She believed that art could change the world, that dance could heal hearts, that beauty could triumph over darkness. Wherever she is tonight, I hope she knows that her light is still shining, still inspiring people to search for truth and beauty. The vigil marked a turning point in the case. While the official investigation continued, public interest began to shift from active searching to commemoration and remembrance. Tiffany's story had become part of local folklore. The artist who walked into the sunset and never returned, leaving behind only questions and the haunting image of footprints leading nowhere. But the sightings didn't stop. Over the following years, reports continued to trickle in from across the country. A woman resembling Tiffany was reportedly seen at art festivals in Colorado, busking with a guitar in New Orleans, working at a bookstore in Vermont. Each report was investigated, but none led to definitive answers. Perhaps the most haunting sighting came in August 2017, exactly 4 years after Tiffany's disappearance. A photography student at the University of Montana was reviewing images from a project about homeless populations when she noticed something that made her gasp. In the corner of a photograph taken in downtown Missoula, barely visible in the shadows of a doorway, was a figure that looked unmistakably like Tiffany Daniels. The woman in the photograph appeared to be older, thinner, wearing clothes that had seen better days. But the bone structure, the way she held herself, the graceful positioning of her hands, it all seemed to match. The photography student immediately contacted local police, who reached out to the FBI and Escambia County investigators. By the time law enforcement arrived in Missoula, the mysterious woman was gone. But interviews with local social service workers revealed that someone matching her description had been seen around the city for several weeks, always moving, never staying in one place long enough to be approached for help. She was like a ghost, remembered homeless outreach coordinator Jake Morrison. People would mention seeing this woman, artistic, quiet, always sketching or writing in a notebook. But whenever we'd go looking for her, she'd vanished. It was like she had some sixth sense about when help was coming. Today, more than a decade after Tiffany Daniels walked away from her car at Fort Island Trail, her case remains one of Florida's most perplexing unsolved mysteries. The official investigation is still active, though resources have been redirected to more recent cases. Her family continues to field calls from people who believe they've seen her, each report reigniting a mixture of hope and heartbreak that has become their constant companion. The theories about what happened to Tiffany have evolved and multiplied over time. Some investigators still believe she was abducted, possibly by someone involved in human trafficking who has kept her moving to avoid detection. Others think she might have suffered a mental health crisis that led her to assume a new identity and life. Still others hold to the theory that she deliberately disappeared, perhaps to escape some threat that was never discovered. But perhaps the most fitting theory comes from those who knew Tiffany best, that she became exactly what she always wanted to be. Art that lives in the space between reality and imagination. A story that continues to unfold in the minds of everyone who hears it. Her apartment, cleaned out years ago by her grieving family, once contained dozens of unfinished paintings and half-choreographed dances. Now, in a sense, her greatest work of art might be the mystery itself. A living, breathing puzzle that continues to inspire searches, investigations, and hope. Those footprints in the sand have long since been washed away by countless tides, but they remain perfectly preserved in the minds of everyone who saw them, walked beside them, tried to understand where they led. They've become a metaphor for all the questions that remain unanswered. Where do we go when we disappear? What happens to dreams that are too big for the world that contains them? And how do we find our way home when we're not sure where home is supposed to be? The lights in Tiffany's old apartment have long since been turned off, but somewhere, in a shelter in Montana, at an art fair in Colorado, on a beach in South Carolina, someone might still be searching for the free-spirited artist who walked into the sunset one August evening and became a legend. Whether Tiffany Daniels found the freedom she was seeking or fell victim to forces beyond her control, her story continues to resonate with anyone who has ever felt trapped by circumstances, who has ever dreamed of disappearing into a new life, who has ever wondered what lies beyond the horizon. In the end, perhaps that's Tiffany's true legacy. Not the paintings she left unfinished or the dances she never completed, but the reminder that some mysteries are more beautiful than their solutions, some questions more important than their answers. She was an artist who painted with light and danced with shadows, a dreamer who believed in magic. And in the decades since her disappearance, she has become exactly that. A piece of magic that refuses to be explained, a masterpiece left forever unfinished, a story that continues to unfold with each person who wonders, what happened to the artist who left the lights on?